okay.
Last week, I guess, I lose track of time quickly, actually, because I don't really care. Tell you the truth, Don. But we got some rain. Yeah, it was last week, several days in a row. It rained, but not a downpour. We had nice steady rain for about 3 days, which took care of the dryness around my teeth here, Roger.
Ah, yes, the sweet mellow sounds of sideband, music to any ham's ears. I first enjoyed listening to sideband over 60 years ago, and I still enjoy hearing it now.
We got 58 degrees this morning, and it's a little bit warmer than it was yesterday. Yesterday morning was 64, but I don't think we're going to get really cold weather this winter. I think we're going to get a lot of rain now. Yeah. Well, it was -1 Celsius here this morning, and it's still 0. I think, the little weather deal here now on my wall. But it was Fahrenheit. It got up to about 58, I think, yesterday, somewhere 57, 58. But it began to cool very rapidly, towards mid and late afternoon. But it's been beautiful days for the last several days, right? Roger. Well, those kind of days when it's raining, that's antenna weather. That's the antenna weather, Mars. You got to get out there and take them antennas and clean them up and change the connectors and really reseam them. And it's antenna kitchen weather, over. Oh, yeah, but hey, look here. I was overruled because I don't even mention the antennas, man. Because what I was doing with the truck and some other things, man. But my heart was out these woods out here fooling with some of these antennas. Oh man. Oh well, you gotta do what you gotta do. There's no doubt about that. Hello, radio. Yeah, I got the intercom this morning, man. I hope it's not too late there. No, I heard the mic. Yeah, Mike just came on doors there. But, yeah, well, I hear you, man. Yeah, hold on just a minute. 95 UM, WLCU. Good morning, sir. Don, are you copying Mike?
Just started. He's not quite in there yet.
Yeah, he was giving you a call. You heard it, Michael. Well, look here, you're into Missouri in fine shape. You're running S9 with no problem at all. I have you out in the clear, okay? Yeah, Don is very clear now. When he and I first begun our chat, the signal wasn't that great, but hey, he was good, loud Q5 in here, no problem. The band hadn't opened between you guys yet, Mr. Arsenault, but Mike is hearing you, okay?
We're listening to signals on 40 meters using a new magnetic loop antenna that I just put together, and it's out on my patio. Where I live, it's a very small place, and I have a teeny patio that I can walk out on. It's very small. It's only big enough, maybe 3 people could be standing up, could fit on it, but that's about all the space there is. And there are very strict regulations here about, I basically can't put up any antennas outside, nothing going off the patio.
Hey, Doc, she told me she was going to have to get on the radio one of these days and talk about me. Put the radio in her damn truck, oh. I already put it in. She didn't know I had put it in there. And I had moved it from around back under the carport once I got everything, got it running. It's a good running old truck. It's an old 98 Ford F-250. But I had cleaned it up on the inside and mounted, just put a dual band in there. I didn't try to put anything HF in there. And put a real short antenna on the top of a little dual band antenna on the top.
I first decided to try an indoor antenna, a magnetic loop. I'd been reading about these online, and it looked like that might be a possibility depending on the signal-to-noise ratio. Could I pick up any signals, and what kind of noise would there be to deal with? The antenna on my patio now is actually the second loop that I built. I built the first one, which was a single turn of copper tubing, a single loop, resonated with a receiving variable capacitor. Basically, the antenna worked. That is, it functioned the way it was supposed to. I could bring it to resonance and see the result, but wasn't able to receive very much. About all I could hear were strong shortwave broadcast signals in the range of 7 to 8 megahertz. I did notice, though, that when I was trying listening on with just a short piece of random length wire, that it made a difference if the wire was inside my unit, my small apartment, or if it was outside. I took it out onto the patio, and even though the patio is very tiny, one time a little bit of it slipped over the edge a few feet accidentally, and I noticed the results on the receiver. Of course, I pulled that back in right away because that's against the regulations where I live. But even from those tests, it was evident that I was going to be able to pick up more signal if I could get something outside. Online calculators are very helpful in determining the physical and resonant characteristics for a loop. In other words, designing the loop. Basically, a loop has a design frequency, and then it's usable from that frequency to approximately half that frequency. So, for example, the large single-turn loop that I first made is about 17 feet in circumference, and it's designed for the 20-meter band for 14 megahertz, or thereabouts. But the other end of the useful range for a loop with those dimensions is 40 meters, about 7 megahertz. And I did find indeed that with the variable capacitor that I had on for receive only, I could achieve resonance at both ends of that range. Here's a pair of screenshots from an online loop design website showing the online calculations side by side for 20 and 40 meters. People have asked me about why I'm going for the HF bands with this project, and I thought I'd say a few words about that. The answer is really very simple. I was first licensed as a ham operator when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. It was 55 to 60 years ago. I operated a lot back then for a period of a few years. Some CW, a tiny bit of AM, but mostly single sideband. That's what I got into. And on the HF bands. The HF bands were very active compared to what they are today. There were times when you couldn't find a quiet frequency on the 20-meter band. Well, Anyway, so why am I doing things the way I'm doing them now and messing around with a loop antenna, trying to tune in 40 meters? Um, it's really just nostalgia. I have these fond memories of what radio was like when I was a kid. Um, I still remember the magic when I first heard shortwave signals coming out of nothing, a piece of wire, and you're hearing somebody talking thousands of miles away on the other side of the world. I went outside and took a couple pictures of my QTH with the loop out on the patio. I'm on the 8th floor of a buildings. The pictures that are up now, the one on the left is from street level, and I've put a little arrow indicating which balcony is my unit, and then 3 more steps of magnification zooming in to where it gets kind of pixelated and grainy, but you can still make out that the loop is indeed up there. Here's a look at my 4-turn loop from inside my apartment. It's just a few feet. It's less than 10 feet away from where I'm sitting right now. The tripod that it's on almost fills up my little balcony space. The antenna is above the railing. There's a variable capacitor. It's a better capacitor than I had on the first single-turn loop. The particular capacitor I'm using now is a split stator capacitor. There's no outside connection to the rotor. It's basically 2 variable capacitors in series. That way the connection, sort of a sliding connection that is built into every variable capacitor for connecting to the rotor portion of it, is not in the circuit. Probably the best capacitors that people use with loops are butterfly capacitors. Down the road, we'll see what happens. I may go that route, but for the time being, the capacitor I have will, I think, be adequate. It's got a plate spacing that's a little more than a typical receiving capacitor, and my initial plans are to run QRP power levels. So even though a loop antenna can build up considerable voltages, probably with power levels in the neighborhood of 5 watts or so, there won't be any arcing at the capacitor. One helpful item that I found on the internet is called WebSDR. Basically, these are software-defined radios that are connected to the internet, each one allowing many listeners to listen and tune it simultaneously. It's basically a receiver acting as a server, but with the spectrum display style of an SDR receiver. A directory of WebSDR receivers is online at websdr.org. I'm located in San Diego, California, and I found one in Sedona, Arizona, that's just a little south of Flagstaff, Arizona. And that's pretty much due east, a little bit northeast of my location, and not that far away. I've been listening using that online receiver for a while now, and just noticing the activity primarily on 40 meters. It looks like I'm going to probably gravitate towards 40 meters, at least for the near future, as a good general purpose band. Another way that WebSDR internet receiver can be useful, especially one that's fairly close to my location, when it comes time for me to do some transmitting, when I'm able to put out a signal. People have done this where they just key down a little bit on an open frequency while they're looking at a remote receiver via the internet, if that receiver is picking up your signal, you'll see your key down or CW activity on the waterfall just shortly after you've done that. So I'm glad I found this particular one that it looks like it could come in handy when I'm ready to test and see if I'm putting out any kind of signal that can be heard by a receiver at that distance.
Yep, I have heard that as well. And well, my first quad that I had was a homebrew 2-element 10-meter quad. It actually had been owned by a fellow that was here in San Antonio that was in the service. And he was getting ready to get out of service, and he was going back to Michigan. And he didn't want to take the antenna with him. So he calls me up and says, hey, I got this antenna. You're welcome to it if you want it. If not, it's going in the dumpster. And I says, oh, hell no, I'll take it. So I got my dad, and we went in the pickup and went over to the guy's place and picked this thing up. It was pretty neat how he'd constructed it. Of course, it was made out of bamboo. 10 meters, no big deal. I had brothers. The boom was a 4-foot piece of dowel rod, like what you'd find in a closet. And then to connect the spreaders to the boom, he used L brackets, like what you use to, hang a shelf up on the wall. And anyway, I brought that home, and oh my gosh. Back then, 10 meters was just going gangbusters. It was back in, I'd say 69, because I just got my general then. And I had a DX60 with an outboard plate modulator and an old Alicrafters receiver. And I had that 2-element quad up. I don't know, it might have been 10 feet above the roof. And boy, you talk about having a blast. That was a cat's meow for a 15-year-old kid. That guy.
This is an interesting QSO going on here. This one guy's talking about cubicle quads that he had when he was a teenager, starting out in ham radio, and wow, that really takes me back, because that's I had cubicle quads as well when I was a kid. Let's listen a little bit more.
No, actually, this was an ICO, modulator. And you talk about living dangerously. I just ran a piece of zip cord, as I remember. I ran it from an external modulator. I hooked it up on hooked the audio output on the bottom side of the plate choke. Attached ground, and I'd flip over to AM and put that modulator on, and I don't remember what I had for a microphone back then, but whatever it was, that thing had plenty of audio.
Oh, wow, more cool memories. I did something very similar to what this guy's talking about. I had a DX20, which was a 50-watt transmitter, built a 25-watt, thereabouts amplifier. I think it had push-pull 6L6s, and wired it up as a plate modulator. And of course, that was bringing all kinds of high voltage from the transmitter over to the modulator. Oh, it's really a good thing my parents didn't know the whole story of what was going on in that upstairs bedroom. I ended up selling that DX20 and the plate modulator to one of my junior high teachers. I think it was in the 8th grade.
This place that I'd gone to work for, I happened to notice there was a two-element gym quad, and that was free band 10-20, and it was, it had fiberglass spreaders, and it had what they call a spider boom, where the boom was only about a foot long, but with the way that the spreaders attached to the boom, it created the proper spacings and stuff. I picked up on that critter, and oh my gosh, did that open up a whole new world for me. It's like, wow, I had this quad with fiberglass spreaders, and it had 20-meter loops on it, as well as 10 and 15, and like the Jeffersons, we just kept moving on up. QB8OTM, WA5UTK.
Yeah, good memories. I remember that most of my antenna work, the cubicle quad and other antennas I put up back then, I used to have to do that kind of thing when my parents weren't home. Okay, back at the home QTH again. I can really see how that WebSDR station in Sedona might really come in handy when it comes time to transmit. I was tuning around the CW portion of 40 meters a couple nights ago and heard quite a bit of activity. Here's a few signals that were coming through. My CW skills are pretty rusty, but I do believe I heard a JA1 calling CQ in there. All in all, I'm pretty darn happy with the way this antenna is performing out on the patio. That's about all I have for this video. I'm going to leave you with a pretty interesting QSO I heard the other night, where the fellows were talking about different kinds of radio equipment and SDR in particular. So, 73 from San Diego, and thanks for listening.
Antenna here on 40 meters, all the HF bands. And up on the island we have a 4-square for 80 meters that we use, as well as other beams and what have you. So that's the story on this end here on VK3KN W1FC. Almost identical radio equipment at both ends, over. Well, in my opinion, it's the only way to go. I mean, once you've used it, you just, fall in love with the approach, and the spectrum analyzer is just top-notch. It's like a piece of commercial test equipment, being able to see the whole band and see people's spectrum and see what the actual signal strengths are in dBMs and all the memories and CW features and whatever are all built into the software, over. Flex 6300. They came out with a 6300, and it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, compared to a lot of the ICOM and the Yaesu and Kenwood higher-end radios, the 6300 is a bargain. And with all the stuff that you get in the software that's built into it, saves you a lot of money and a lot of extra little boxes that you need around the hardware, over. What was the question? Oh, yeah. The Flex radio was the first SDR radio on the market, and they've kept up the pace for the new developments right along, and their service is outstanding, over. Yeah, right. It's 100 watts, but with the amplifier, I only need about 50 watts to drive the amplifier, over. I've got no tubes. It's solid state, over. No, it's made in Italy. It's an Italian amplifier called an Expert 2K-FA. If you Google Expert 2K-FA, you'll see it, over. It's certainly doing well for you, that's for sure. Yeah, and the SBE company Expert that makes it, they have an in-between amplifier out now called, I think it's called the 1.5 or 1.3 KFA, which is quite a beautiful piece of equipment. It's quite light. It's for the power, you know, it's I think under 20 pounds are in that area. I mean, pretty incredible. So, I don't know, if I didn't have the higher power ones, I'd be tempted to get that one just because it's so light and easy to move about. VK3KN, W1FC.